Hello, everyone. If you don't know who I am, my name is Voltie. I'm one of the committee members, and I will be your host for this evening, bringing you the Foundation's 7-Point Highlander points update. This is going to be a big one. It's got the lead into CanCon, and there are some other early season events going into the new year. So this should be a very exciting list of changes, and we hope that everyone has some discussion points to bring to the table. Joining me, just above me, is my lovely co-host Raj of Adelaide. He is also one of the committee members and a genuinely lovely guy. Why don't you say hi to everyone, Raj?
Hey everyone, like what I said, I'm Raj, I'm from Adelaide, one of the 7-Point committee members, been playing the format for a bit. I remember doing my first points announcement with Ben and Jimbo. I can't remember exactly which update it was, but it's like a year ago at this point. But it's good to be back on camera, good to be talking with everyone, talking with you about this points update.
Well, it's lovely to have you. I'm going to give you the first card. Now, this is probably not going to be too much of a surprise to anyone who's been paying a lot of attention to the format, but it still might be a little surprising if you have been checking in every couple of months. But the first change is Fable of the Mirror Breaker is going from 0 to 1. Raj, take us away.
Yeah, absolutely. So Fable of the Mirror Breaker, people who've played pretty much any Magic format in the last 2 years just know how good this card is. Just what it does on raid for 3 mana sets up 2 must-answer threats, offers some card selection along the way. It's commonly referred to as a glue card, sort of a staple. Not exactly a staple, but more of a glue card that is just such low opportunity cost that it goes in a lot of different variety of decks. It goes in obviously in red-white mid-range decks. It sees play in Jund. It sees play in combo decks such as even Reanimator. Sees play in the Nadu Time Walk deck. It just goes in everything because the card just does everything. And if anyone's played any amount of Standard or Pioneer or Legacy or Modern in the past couple of years, you know how good this card is. And a very cool fact, a cool little trivia fact, showed up more than Brainstorm in the RC7 Winter Library side event, which is just kind of insane if you think about it.
Yeah, I think that was one of the most damning data points that I came across when we were doing the analysis for RC7. Obviously, Fable had been creeping up at that point, but having it actually overtake the best blue card is kind of insane. And to touch on the last point, I think this is understated, but it's much like Birthing Pod of old, where every single time they print a new creature, if it's not legendary, there's some new line of text on Fable that didn't exist prior. And given how currently powerful it is, given how expectedly powerful it's going to be in the future, I think that while this might be a little surprising, this is probably, hopefully, going to be a healthy change for the format. To answer quickly, Cypher, Misstep is not a blue card for the purposes of data analysis, but I understand where you're coming from.
Well, it's like, yeah, look, the card just does a lot, and just the impact it has on games where it resolves is just crazy. You know, if it gets countered, sure, there's very few ways to actually cleanly answer it, but it just does so much when it resolves. And hopefully this is sort of like an umbrella power down for a lot of the top tier decks in the format at the moment. We are like I mentioned earlier, we're trying to target multiple different archetypes at this point. So we're trying to hit multiple birds with one stone, such that in the future we don't have to target a particular archetype too hard in any future updates.
I think that's it for Fable. If anyone has any comments or questions, feel free to leave them in chat, but otherwise we'll move on. The next points change is going to be significantly less surprising to multiple people, and that is Psychic Frog. The frog was on the watch list from the previous points update. It has greatly affected every single constructed format that it's touched since it got printed, and the basic way that a lot of people are approaching the points changes of the points list is we get to a certain point where we can't point every single threat because the format just becomes too nebulous and it's too difficult to keep track of what's going on. Notably, though, Psychic Frog falls into the 2 mana category rather than the 3 mana category, and when pointing 3 mana threats, the bar that you have to clear is quite high. When you're looking at 2 mana threats, however, because the window to interact with them is shorter, and the ability to have counterspell up, for example, is narrower, the more powerful a 2-drop is in comparison to the other 2-drops, the more likely it is to get pointed. So in terms of talking about Psychic Frog specifically, this is a little fun fact. When I read this card during the MH3 spoiler season, I flat out said, no, that's not a real card. I turned to the person who showed me the card on their phone and I said, this card is ridiculous. There's no way they're printing this. Every single line of text on Psychic Frog is very, very impactful in one way or another. And when you slam them all together, you get a card that is relatively unbeatable for some archetypes. If you're playing red burn-based removal, or if you plan on blocking, neither of those are going to work. And the floor on it is a 2-mana 1/2 that maybe it fuels your graveyard for something, maybe it trades with a removal spell like Swords to Plowshares, and the most analogous card that we currently have on the points list for Psychic Frog is Dreadhorde Arcanist. It's the most impactful 2-drop that you can play that will snowball out of control with a very, very high floor. In terms of Frog itself, it's showing up in a lot of different archetypes despite being a gold card, and I think that's really important. Every Grixis deck, with or without Lutri, is playing it. Breach is playing it, Luris Breach, and sometimes Normal Breach. Reanimator is using the second line of text as a bit of a free roll as well. I've seen Blue Moon decks splashing for Frog. I've seen Black-White decks splashing for Frog. It's just very ubiquitous for a card that ostensibly should be hard to cast and should be asking a lot of you. And the actual play patterns when it comes to the card itself is sometimes it'll just be a 2-drop that gets answered, and sometimes it's one of the few cards that you could have played that won you the game on the spot the way that Frog did.
Yeah.
Did you have anything to add to that, Raj?
No, I completely agree, and I'm glad you brought up how it doesn't negate combat, but sort of makes combat decisions for your opponent really hard. Because do you swing into an untapped Frog? Do you block a Frog that's attacking because they could just discard their hand, trade with you? People and the fact that you can give it flying on command is really good. This card, like you said, just does everything. Not only is it a rolling card advantage engine at 2 mana, similar to Dreadhorde Arcanist, but it just also does the combat thing so much better. So it's a fast clock, it's a discard outlet, it's a card advantage engine. I think that's enough reasons to point it. People are saying it might get banned in Legacy, so who knows?
I think it should have been banned in Legacy already.
Oh, it should have been banned last time. We'll look at that in December. But
that card is so heinous. We have a lot of comments in chat, but no questions, so we'll move on to the next card, and this one's for you, Raj. I'm going to tee it up for you. This might surprise some of you, unless you've been playing the format really regularly and have been losing to this card over and over again, because it's truly absurd how good this card is in comparison to its kin. White Plume Adventurer is going from 2 to 3 points. Go for it.
This is a bit of a whammy. I can see some people maybe disagreeing with this change, because the 3-point bracket is a very high power one. It's it holds the Moxen, it holds a lot of other powerful combo enablers like Underworld Breach, Luris, and all of that stuff. But we feel like, having seen the results from the last 3 big events, such as Can Brawl, such as the Winner Duel event at POG, seeing the RC side event, and also a lot of events that I personally have seen in Adelaide, White Plume Adventurer is just too free of a slot in red-white decks. We've got a lot of new players who are coming into the format, who are building sort of Naya and Mardu decks, because they, people own a lot of those staples. They've been built in the last, that have been printed in the last couple of years. And this thing sort of just is a very easy way to just go, here's my, like on curve, you play White Plume Adventurer, it's quite good. Just wins the game single-handedly. But then ahead of curve, if you play it off of an Ancient Tomb, if you play it off of a Mana Crypt, Soul Land plus Lotus Petal on turn 1, it's just, the ceiling on this card is so absurdly high, and the floor is quite low because it actually fights for the initiative quite well itself, untapping itself in your opponent's upkeep. The card is quite singular. There's not a lot of other cards that do what White Plume does, and just seeing how ubiquitous it was despite going to 2 points, we feel to power down the initiative, the right call was to bring White Plume to 3. And I feel that I think it's something that you mentioned really well in the slide as well, where the mana differential between 3 mana and 4 mana is quite big, and we feel that itself is also worth a 2-point differential between Seasoned Dungeoneer, Undermountain, and White Plume.
Yeah, to follow on, I think it's really understated when people look at constructed formats and they see the difference between a 3 and a 4 drop, and it's a little bit, simpler to gauge. You think of Fable into Shoulder It as a curve, but when you look at White Plume and what you're planning to do to turn White Plume on, the difference between 3 and 4 mana suddenly becomes a full turn, a full card as well, and if you skip that turn, you get an extra activation of the initiative, you get counters, you start snowballing, and realistically, I think that this is one of the changes that I pushed the most when it came to this points announcement, and I think a lot of the discussions, and this is coming up in chat, is whether Seasoned Dungeoneer should go to 2, or White Plume should go to 3, or both. The difference between Seasoned Dungeoneer and Caves of Chaos or Undermountain, that gap isn't as meaningful as the gap between White Plume and all of the others that start at 4. It's as simple as that, really. Whether Season stays at 1 going forward is going to be on its own merit, but in terms of adding a point to the initiative mechanic, having to decide between the other cards in your deck plus a Caves plus a Seasoned versus White Plume taking up 3/7 or 3/8 of your point total is going to be a meaningful deck building decision that people will have to make. I think for now, I'm going to hold off on the questions unless there's any that have come through. Yeah, I mean, gut reaction, Henry, playing this at 3, exactly. Like, when you think about White Plume as a way to spend half your points, it's still really good. Like, it's the thing that you will sometimes just win games for no reason. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Let's move on to the next one. This is another unsurprising one. I've really taken the easy seat this time round. We have Phlage to 1. Phlage was on the watch list. It was very likely going to be pointed either in this update or the previous one. Nothing too surprising here. A lot of people have talked about this card over time and whether or not it should have been won the last time or this time, and that's a really simple way to know that we need to make this change. The gap between Uro and Phlage is not 2 points. The gap between Phlage and Kroxa is not 0 points. That's one of the easy ways to think about it, but realistically, the existence of Phlage is something that is relatively unique within the red-white scope, where we have this completely inevitable card that, there are limited ways to interact with. You can exile it from the graveyard, you can try to interact with it on the stack, but at some point, if you're not doing either of those things, they're going to flash it back, it's going to eat one of your cards. If they have a Caracas or a Mother of Runes to protect it, you're just dead. And in terms of the recent uptick, which has been quite a substantial uptick that I think people haven't seen quite as obviously, red-white is really, really good. And Phlage at 0 points is a really, really big part of that. So realistically, I expect that Phlage will still see a decent amount of play at 1, but the fact that it was showing up in Bant decks and in Abzan decks, it's an unreal amount of power to have at 0 points. Whether or not Uro stays at 2 or joins Phlage at 1 is a problem for the future, and comparing those two is relatively negligible. Comparing Phlage to all of the 0 point cards, it very clearly needs to be at 1, so here we are.
Yeah, absolutely. Phlage was on the watch list because there was a bit of skepticism at the start about how heavy of a pip requirement double red, double white is, how hard it is for red-white decks to fill up the graveyard. But obviously, just seeing the actual results from events, we can see that Phlage is just, those could be difficult to get at times, but it's not difficult enough of the time for Phlage to, not be a significant deck building decision. It sort of just goes in the red-white colors if you're already in those decks. And like you said, people have been splashing for it as well. And some of the interactions of this card with Arena of Glory that I think went quite under the radar during spoiler season and the first couple of weeks when this card was out. I think a lot of us didn't see it, but then when people actually started putting those two cards together in their decks, you could see the real potential of Phlage and the real ceiling that the card can get to.
Yeah, I think it's unreal that Hall of the Bandit Lord got a strict upgrade and was a red land all of a sudden and worked with a red card that they printed in the same set. That's just my take on how Watchlist has decided, but we're working with what we have to. So, some of you in chat will think that this is the end of the pointings for this points update. And I am so happy to tell you that you are very, very wrong. The next card is a banger, and I think Raj is going to have a very fun time explaining this. Deep breaths, bud. We have Gush 1-2.
Ooh, alright. Gush. Gush is a card that, we coming from Adelaide, we used to have a lot, pre-COVID, we used to have a lot of people playing Rug, we used to have a lot of people playing Guest Pile. Just seeing this card perform at 0 points, I was just like, this is nuts. Like, this card should be a little bit more than 0 points. So eventually, rightfully so, the card did eat a point. And in the more recent past, especially in 2024, we've seen the Grixis decks sort of coalesce in their deck building from different regions. And the one common thread that we do start seeing is the Gush interaction with Lutri. So Lutri is something we'll get to later on, but Gush is just such a strong and such an easy way for decks like Grixis that are all about 1-for-1 interactions to just regain card advantage and sort of turn the corner from there. So, sorry about spoilers, Vance, but I thought I had to mention Lutri in relation to Gush because it's sort of.
I mean, it's on screen. Like.
yeah. It's just it's hard to talk about both the cards sort of independent of each other, but Gush is just such an easy way for decks like Grixis to sort of regain card advantage after Molten collapsing your guy, playing like 1-for-1 counter spelling, and then you just go Lutri in hand, Gush, regain your card advantage, and it's just such an easy way to turn the corner. So I feel like that's one of the biggest reasons for Gush to get pointed, and we've seen the performance of Grixis. It did well at CanCon, it did really well at Mana Clash, it's been doing well over the past 3 events that we've mentioned in this stream already. So I feel Gush is a point on Gush, taking it to 2, is the right way to sort of attack these Grixis, Blue Moon, and Jeskai decks that have been doing really well recently.
Yeah, 100%. And you did talk about Lutri, and we will get to that. I think the main reason that we were trying to decide between Gush versus Lutri as a way to hit Lutri Grixis, the reason that we've chosen Gush is that it allows the 8-point Blue Moon decks and the 8-point Mono Red decks and 7-point Mono Red decks to remain viable entry points to the format. I think realistically pointing either of these is going to impact a very small subset of decks, but there won't be much crossover, there will be a lot of crossover between those two categories. Another option that I pitched was pointing Mystic Sanctuary, and I think that out of those 3 options, Gush was the right one. Going forward, we'll be able to see whether or not, we can bring Gush back down to 1, which I would personally not prefer anytime soon. But realistically, whether Lutri will need to go to 4. And then, in regard to actually looking at the points list, obviously we're talking about Gush in terms of its decks and what it appears in. But when you look at the points list, Treasure Cruise is at 2. And Gush has been better than Treasure Cruise in every constructed format where they've both been legal. Gush has been banned in Legacy for a very long time. I haven't checked in. I don't think it's been unbanned. I really hope not.
No, it's
and then Treasure Cruise got banned there as well. So those two are quite analogous, and I think that realistically we'll see how this impacts the blue decks and what people are doing, but powering those decks down in terms of raw card advantage and forcing them to at least spend some mana on recouping those costs should at the very least bring them closer in line to the fold. Now, So to recap so far, we have Fable, Phlage, Psychic Frog, Gush, and White Plume all copping a point. And some of you might think that we're done. And again, I'm very pleased to tell you that you are wrong. The last points change for the Foundation's points update is Tolarian Academy going from 1 to 2. This is going to be a really big deal for a lot of people, and I just need you to sit down and think about it for half a second. I understand that your bots players are going to be scared of Null Rod and Collector Roof, and they keep printing cards that hit artifacts. I understand that they print cards like Harbinger of the Seas to go alongside the Blood Moons and whatnot that we already have. But if you think about it, none of the lands on the points list are worth more than 1 point. From 2 and up, it's just spells. And Tolarian Academy is by far the best non-fetch land of all time. It's not close. You can think about any other lands that have some utility. So Caracas, for example, Mishra's Workshop, Gaia's Cradle. There's a bunch of other lands that are really, really good. Tolarian Academy is better than all of them by a very large margin. We had a lot of discussions on how we could slow down some of the fast mana that people were having access to. That it was between, this and City of Traders and Workshop and Urza Saga and some other stuff. Realistically, casting Blood Moon on turn 2 does not save you from Academy. Casting Null Rod on turn 2 does not save you from Academy. Playing Strip Mine on their turn 1 Academy might still not be enough to stop you from dying to Tolarian Academy. On top of the bots application, on top of the obvious artifact aggressive decks, it's also a combo card that's really easy to combo with. I don't want to talk too much about the card, but the fact that cards like Tinker have gone down, the fact that crop rotation is kind of in the air, the reason that we couldn't D-point crop rotation is because of Tolarian Academy, and I think that we were wrong in that regard. I think the issue was Academy and not crop rotation into Academy. I understand that this is going to freak some people out, but if you just sit down and look at the points list and look at all the 1-point lands like Ancient Tomb and Caracas and Urza Saga, and then compare them to Tolarian Academy, kind of makes sense. That's my take. Anything to add, Raj? Otherwise, I'm going to start addressing some of the questions.
Yeah, just one thing that I wanted to mention about Academy is also the new innovation in the format, which has been the Eldrazi decks, thanks to Modern Horizons 3. Obviously, not all Eldrazi lists are the same, but a lot of them do play an artifact package, which utilize Soul Rings, Talismans, other mana rocks, or other cheap mana rocks rather, and then in combination with Tolarian Academy to power out the big Eldrazi. We saw an Eldrazi deck do really well, top 8 at the RC7 Win a Library event. I've seen a lot of Eldrazi locally in Adelaide. We've got 3 different players, and their decks are all artifact Tolarian Academy based. And we felt that with the other decks in the environment, such as Grixis, Jeskai, Mardu, Initiative, all copying points, it would be a bad idea to leave bots and Eldrazi untouched. And this is sort of more of a preemptive pointing. And like you touched upon with crop rotation and stuff later, we will be looking at seeing where we can make changes there. And also, I'm glad someone mentioned the Wheels deck. Tolarian Academy is also very easy to abuse in the Wheels deck.
Yeah, it's crazy how a land that taps anywhere from 3 to 17 mana can be used in more than one way.
Absolutely.
Alright, now, all of you in chat might be thinking, surely they're done with the pointings. And this time, you're right, that's it. So, we have Fable 0 to 1, Psychic Frog 0 to 1, White Plume 2 to 3, Phlage 0 to 1, Tolarian Academy 1 to 2, and Gush 1 to 2. There are a lot of watchlist updates, a lot more than the previous the previous points update, and we'll be getting them into a moment. Whether or not there are cards that we maybe should have depointed in this update was largely, in terms of boiling this down, there are a lot of big, high relevance update high relevance events coming up in the near future. We have CanCon at the end of January. We have a couple of events in January as well. And because of how the format was turning out, it was becoming very homogenized. We saw a lot of the same cards, a lot of the same colors, and we wanted to do a big change. And I think if we make 6-point changes, which I think were all correct, if we also make depointings, we run the risk of just generating too much new data and shaking the format up too much. And so I think this is a good way to stabilize the format into a new settled place. There are pointings and depointings that we'll revisit come February, obviously, but in terms of making people try new stuff, maybe play around with some of the other cards from MH3 or Foundations and see what they might want to do and not be so constrained. Because at the moment, if you're building, say, red, you suddenly have to play white, and there are like 7 or 8 cards that are 0 points that you have to play, and then there are some underpointed cards that are red and white that you have to play, and suddenly your whole deck's built. It's just too much like that. Grixis had the same thing. The bots decks had the same thing. The Gush prowess decks, and this is going to hit all of them. You'll note, if you're a sharp-eyed viewer, that there are no green cards on this, and that is very deliberately intentional. Green is by far the least played color, and by far the worst color in Highlander at the moment. So hopefully this can have a bit of a resurgence without actively depointing any of the green cards, because, again, a lot of the pointed green cards are actually blue and black cards. But, yeah, this is the points changes. If you have anything to add, Raj, go for it. Otherwise, I'll move to the watch list.
Yeah, no, the reason there are no depointings is a lot of these pointings hitting the top tier decks is an opportunity for the decks that may have deserved depoints to sort of be revisited, like the green decks, like you mentioned. Maybe it's time to bring out your Arborels and your Noble Hierarchs again, and hopefully that does happen. But I think six points is enough of a shake up to the format where we can try to revive some of the sort of archetypes that have been left to the wayside, and hopefully that works out well, and we'll see how the players adapt to these changes. So do you want to move on to the watch list then, Wei?
Yeah, absolutely. First up is 4th Eorlingas 1-2. Take it away.
All right, so we've already seen a lot of red-white pointings. We've already seen red-white decks perform really well over the course of 2024. We are hoping that the points it has received this update, the 3 points that red-white decks have received, is enough to sort of curtail the power. But we know just how good Eorlingas is. It's good on 2 mana if you've played a 1 mana threat, and it's good on turn 7 when you've got 7 mana. It's a potent finisher for control decks. It's good in aggressive initiative or red-white based decks. We feel like this card just does too much. It's a good curve filler while also being extremely powerful. So if the red-white decks continue to perform well and this card keeps showing up a lot, we might pull the trigger in February.
Yeah, I think to talk on this, and this is going to apply to all of the watch list cards, a lot of these were in contention for being pointed this time round, and some of them were just 1-for-1 swaps. Realistically, if we point 4th Eorlingas from 1-2, red-white has to have an incredible showing after 3 points have been added to it. This was just the next best red-white card to add a point to, and that's why it didn't get a point this time round. If we start seeing people splash further and further out in order to play some of the less restrictive red and white cards, then we might see 4th Eorlingas go to 2 in that regard. In the sense that if you have the ability to make one of these colors, 4th Eorlingas is quite a good splash card, where Phlage doesn't have that. Phlage does something different. So this is on the watch list. This may change, this may not. Don't freak out if you're registering Sacred Foundry or Plateau. We're not out to get you. It's just that there were a lot of red and white decks in the last several events, but we still curtailed it a bit. We think that adding 4 points... I mean, we had this discussion. We thought adding 4 points to red and white was too many, and this was simply the 4th best option.
Yeah. Plateau is not banned. You just have to... lay your deck out on the table and sort of retool your deck.
Yeah.
So yeah. That's the hope.
Lutri, 3 to 4. So this is obviously tied with Gush. Gush was the one that had the change made. Lutri was perfectly reasonable for us to change instead. Realistically, the odds that Lutri goes to 4 as well as Gush, being at 2, is probably unlikely. However, I do think it's a card that we should be keeping an eye on for a couple of reasons. So, on the one hand, Lutri obviously has very potent synergies with cards like Gush and Price of Progress, but it is not to be understated that the power and consistency you get when you have a companion is completely unreal. It is by far the most individually broken mechanic in Magic, and that isn't going to change, hopefully, ever. Lutri is the best companion for our particular format because it has no restriction and because they keep printing really, really broken 3-drops, so Lurrus keeps getting a little bit worse. But we do want to keep an eye on Lutri. If this does go to 4 and Gush stays at 2, this is going to hopefully bring about meaningful deck decisions. So if you want to play Lutri plus Gush as a way to offset your 1-for-1 game plan, you're probably playing Force because that's just the nature of playing blue 1-for-1 decks. Suddenly you have all 7 of your points accounted for, and you have to make real decisions about, Deathrite Shaman and Mana Drain and Reanimate and Murktide Region. Again, this is the watch list. Keep in mind that we are not out to get the Lutri Grixis players either. These are just the things that we have identified to be objectively powerful in comparison to everything else in the 7-point landscape. Next up, we have Demonic Counsel, 0 to 1. Go for it.
Alright, Demonic Counsel. Not often that we get very powerful tutors from standard sets. I personally was a bit scared of Beseech the Mirror, but I'm glad that it has found a niche spot in our format. Sees a bit of play, sees a bit of brewing. We did put that card on the watch list. Unfortunately, it didn't make enough of a splash to go onto the points list. I think Demonic Counsel is sort of on the same axis, but just by the nature of our format and how powerful combo decks can be, it is sort of incumbent on us to keep a close eye on tutors like this that do get pointed. Demonic Counsel is by no means... Well, it's very efficient because it's 2 mana, similar to Demonic Tutor, but it doesn't come without a cost. Getting Delirium, especially early when combo decks do want to use their tutors to assemble their hand, getting Delirium all the time is not free. And that is a big negating factor for a card like this. But we still want to keep a close eye on something like this. Decks like Reanimator that play a lot of discard naturally. Decks like Thoracle that play heaps of cantrips, that do play baubles, etc. Can get Delirium by turn 3, say, relatively easily in most games. But obviously Demonic Counsel, you put on the stack, you get Endurance, you're like, alright, well, I'll go search for the Gristlebrand in my deck. It comes with the downside. It's not free, but we do appreciate that the card has power to it, and we want to keep a close eye on it.
Yeah, I don't really have much to add. I think at the moment, with the nature of a lot of cards that are mainboard playable, that have incidental graveyard hate, Demonic Counsel isn't as powerful as it actually looks. Obviously, we do need to keep an eye on it because Demonic Tutor exists. But I think part of the symptom and why I didn't want Counsel to 1 straight away is that we have ended up with a points list that has a bunch of tutors on it at one point that are just garbage. Wishclaw Talisman is on there, and Lion Tutor is on there.
Tutor.
Yeah, Profane Tutor. Like, these cards are all really, really bad in comparison to Demonic Tutor, but they exist at one point because, either they've proven themselves or just as a, mechanism of we don't really want this to be happening. Demonic Counsel's fail rate is pretty substantial. Wishclaw Talisman has a downside, but it doesn't fail. It will always be a 3-mana tutor, where Demonic Counsel can just do nothing. And so I think, for the moment, we'll let people do what they want to do. There are a couple of combo decks that have access to Demonic Council at the moment, which I think is fine. We have weakened the red-white decks and the Grixis decks to a certain degree, so hopefully there's a little bit more room for the combo decks to grow. But at the same time, all it really takes is being aware of its existence, adjusting your sideboard, adjusting your main deck, and this is a very, very beatable card.
Yep, absolutely. I think I saw a question about Nadu Walks not getting points, but Nadu decks did actually get 2 points if you look at if you consider Fable and Phlage, which were sort of auto includes in that sort of deck. So the thing with the Walks deck is it's the combo side is powerful, but it's easy to interact with. Kill spells can stop the combo. Graveyard Hate can stop the combo. It's just that the fallback mid-range plan of the deck is so strong, and we understand that Nadu is part of that fallback mid-range plan, but we're hoping that the Phlage and Fable points sort of affect the Walks deck as well and depower it enough to keep it in line with other decks in the format.
To answer you, Cypher, was Bazaar or non-Demonic Council pieces from the Reanimated decks considered? I pitched Reanimate. I think it's something that I want to look at in the future, but because Psychic Frog is getting hit in this update, and that was an auto-include in all of the Reanimated decks, they have been hit. On top of that, if we do see a resurgence in decks like Reanimator and decks playing Demonic Council, people will just need to play more Graveyard Hate that's a bit more targeted or a bit more powerful, and it'll be a self-correcting issue. So it shouldn't be too much of a problem, because, registering something like Reanimator at a big event, you really have to be right in terms of what people are playing, what interaction they're playing, what counter interaction you need to be playing, and, the decks themselves are self-correcting in that regard. Okay, it looks like there aren't any more questions, just a couple of comments. So let's move to the next one. This is not going to be that much of a surprise. I've definitely suggested it a couple of times over the course of the stream. We're officially watchlisting crop rotation to 0. As mentioned before, this card was kept at 1 because of Tolarian Academy, and having those two cards together be 1 point is terrifying. Realistically, if Tolarian Academy at 2 is a stable place for that card to land, and crop rotation continues just not being a good card, then we might be able to bring it back to 0. This would hopefully give a small buff to green, because they would have the best use of crop rotation for Gaia's Cradle, because they'll have cards like Allosaur or Shepherd protecting their crop rotation. But they also have other ways to get Cradle, like Elvish Reclaimer at the moment, so it shouldn't be that big of an issue. It's just kind of the state of the format where crop rotation is really, really bad, and it was kept at 1 because of other cards that weren't being pointed. Now that we've corrected that, and I do genuinely think Tolarian Academy will sit at 2 for quite a while, hopefully we can bring crop back to 0. Even if it's at 0, I fully expect it to still be pretty bad. So keep an eye out for the next update in February, and we'll be revisiting that. The last one's pretty quick, so I'll just run it over. We're removing Bolas' Citadel. Basically, we were scared of this card because Tinker went to 1. We were scared of what people could do with Bolas' Citadel. And in short, it sucks. It's been underperforming in every way. It hasn't been showing up. There are a lot of other combo decks that people are playing that are just better and more reliable. Bolas' Citadel simply doesn't guarantee you a win enough of the time. It requires you to play a lot of other cards that you need to put in your deck, like Fast Bond, just to make the deck functional. So I think it's fine. Realistically, we can very easily put this back on the watch list, but in terms of discussing it at every single meeting, this was relatively a safe option. We don't need to be looking at this card until it shows up again. If you want Citadel to be a point, or if you think it's good enough to be a point, play Citadel decks. We don't see them. We want them to do well, and it's a cool card, but no one's playing it. Let's have a look at chat. So that's it for the watch list changes. If you just want to run down the list, Raj, I'll catch up on chat.
Yeah. So despite the significant points changes, we also have a big watch list, like a decent amount of watch list movement this update as well. So crop rotation down to 0. Thanks to the academy pointing, we'll be keeping an eye on crop rot's performance to see how that goes. Lutri is being kept an eye on to go up to 4 points. A lot of players have told me that they would probably still consider playing Lutri at 4, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. 4th Eorlingas up to 2. Powerful finisher, powerful curve fiddler, very strong card. If red-white decks continue to perform at the level that they have been, this might be a trigger we pull. And the Debotic Counsel, strong tutor, not free, but quite strong. We'll be keeping a close eye on its performance as well.
So, if anyone has joined the chat a little late, I'm going to quickly go back to the actual points changes before we move on to the fun stuff. So Fable to 1, Psychic Frog to 1, White Plume from 2 to 3, Phlage to 1, Tolarian Academy 1 to 2, and Gush 1 to 2. So now on to the fun stuff. The next points announcement will be in February. I believe it's meant to be the 9th. I'm not confident if it's the next week or the week prior, but it'll be with Aether Drift. This puts it after CanCon. So this is the points format for CanCon, and if you want to start preparing, you've got a full 2.5 months to do it. So don't complain that you haven't had enough time to study for the test. You've got plenty of time. This is the format. And then we have a short little calendar. So here are some upcoming events. For the start of January, we have 2 events for Isaac's birthday down in Melbourne. That is the Team Championships and a regular 7-point Highlander singles event. We then have the Nationals at CanCon. March the 7th, I believe that date is locked in, will be the side event at RC8. April 26th will be Mana Clash, so April 26th and 27th, that'll be the World Championship and the Team Trios. If you have any events in mind and you think that you're not certain that they're coming up because they're not on this slide, please refer to the TOs around the country. They're still the place to go to find out what events are being run, where you need to fly to if you decide to. But otherwise, this is what we have as locked in, very visible interstate level events. That's it from us in terms of the actual points changes. I'll leave the chat going for a little bit, so if anyone has any questions, feel free to filter them at the moment. But Raj, if you want to talk about anything in particular, feel free to.
Yeah, it'll be exciting to see what people do with this update. It's quite a big one for CanCon, so looking forward to a lot of information, a lot of data coming in from events leading up to CanCon and CanCon itself. For upcoming events, I know these are the bigger ones that might be worth traveling for, but a good way to keep in touch with your local scene is to actually jump on the Discord. I feel like every region has its own little chat where people announce smaller events like weeklies, casual events, monthly events. So it's a good way to keep up with what's happening in the local scene, especially when you're new to the format and you're not very familiar with the community and when events happen. I think that's a good way to do it. Are you going to CanCon this year, Bye? Oh, next year, sorry?
Yeah, of course. I'm contractually obligated. I'll be there.
Fair enough. I, unfortunately, I'll be traveling to India the same month, so I won't have enough money or leave to travel. I was at CanCon last year. It was huge, 191 people. I had a blast. It was actually my first big interstate event. I was planning to go to GP Brisbane before COVID. Sadly, couldn't find the time to do it. But yeah, it was my first big event, and then I ended up going to Mana Clash this year as well. Both big events, fantastic. It was great. It was great putting faces to names that you've been chatting with on Facebook, chatting with on Discord for like 5 years now. It was a fantastic event. Like if you can find the time, if you can find the money, I would highly recommend you attend at least one, if not both of those, and all the other events that have been listed here.
To address some of the stuff in chat, in terms of cards being evaluated or pointed or depointed or added to the watch list, everything that has been in this presentation is something that all of the committee members have discussed. If you have any ideas on changes that you believe should have been made in this update or should be viewed in the future, you can simply reach out to any of us. You can put in the public points discussion. I'm going to make a video for Wednesday, and that'll be my personal watch list. This is a project that I'm working on at the moment where I think having a bit of visibility on one of the committee members and what they're keeping an eye on should hopefully be helpful. So a lot of the cards that people are mentioning, like Gamble, like Misstep, like Breach and whatnot, and Tameo, for the most part, they were either brought up and dismissed, or they were, next in line, but they weren't officially added to the watch list. If you have ideas about them, please talk to us. That is our purpose. We are here to serve the community. We are here to serve the format. So if there's any cards at all that you think need adjustments or you think are in an incorrect place, we'd love to hear your ideas. My DMs are open. I'm sure the other four will be happy to read things as they come through. But if you're looking for an answer that comes a little bit too quickly, I'm the terminally online one. So feel free to reach out. Otherwise, a couple of questions here that I will go through. So any thoughts on the ongoing mental misstep back and forth from Exuit? This is going to be something that comes up every single time. The committee does briefly talk about mental misstep every committee meeting just because it is at the forefront of everyone. Since joining, I've been keeping track of the numbers and keeping track of what the format actually looks like. We each have pretty different stances on the card. Everyone in the community has different stances on the card, so there isn't something I can present from the committee at this point in time, other than it is not being changed and it is not on the watch list. So the official committee stance is that for at least the next, until at least the next meeting, it's going to be at 0.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Misstep's one of those cards where you'll always see the stats for it being sky high, but like you mentioned earlier in the stream, Mental Misstep's not a blue card, it's a colorless card, but it also helps keep the have stack interaction for non-blue decks. And obviously people remember the times when their crop rotation gets misstepped and they get completely blown out of the game. But also a lot of times people need to remember that, misstep is rotting in your hand while your opponent's playing 3 and 4 mana haymakers while you've got a dead card in hand. So obviously the card is extremely polarizing. It's got a very, very high ceiling when it's good. A lot of the games where you do misstep someone turn 1, it puts your opponent behind by quite a big margin. But yeah, like what I said, it's a card we discuss all the time. We just need to continue discussing it, continue hearing the thoughts from the community, and see if we can get to a conclusion at some point.
I'm going to address Henry here. So Fable is underplayed at 1 point. Will it be reevaluated? I think while it is worth 1 point on power level, people are likely to underplay it at 1 point. I'm not certain. It'll obviously every card on the points list and due to be put on the points list gets evaluated. That's the point. However, I do think it would be quite surprising to me if Fable drops off the planet at 1 point. I know that the actual power level of the card has become more visible to people over time while it's been at 0. So for the most part, people are aware of the actual power level of the card, and I fully expected to see play at 1 point. Whether it sees very, very little play compared to the other 1 point cards, that's a data point that we will review, obviously. But in terms of how much the card has shown up, how much the card actually does, we think that it really should be a 1 point card, and I would argue that it probably should have been a 1 point card earlier. So we'll see how it goes going forward. At no point are we ever married to changes that happen to the points list. Everything shifts over time. The metagame shifts, new cards get printed, people decide that something is or isn't worth playing at certain point values, and all we can really do is make our best guess and use our best judgment. So for the moment, Fable's going to be at 1. We're going to see how that plays out. But yes, we would be reevaluating any cards that see 0 play after they're changed.
Generally, a lot of cards that do go to 1, the knee-jerk reaction from a lot of players is that, I can't put this card in my deck anymore. And I think a lot of people had that reaction with Dreadhorde Arcanist, but Dreadhorde Arcanist is an example I like to give people when they talk about 1 point cards being banned, because Dreadhorde Arcanist still shows up, still does well. Michael and I played it in our Grixis lists at Mana Clash, and both of us were in the top 8. So I think cards like when cards go to 1 point, the philosophy changes from this card is very strong, it is free, I'm going to put it in my deck, to how best can I utilize this card and how close can I get to its ceiling. So personally, for me, a card like Fable would see a lot of play in decks that play Ancient Tomb, in decks that play Mana Crypt. So it might be played alongside, or with cards that, or in decks that can utilize its discard to draw to effect the best. So I feel like Fable at 1 will find its home eventually. It's just a matter of getting to that point, and how players experiment with the deck building.
I also fully expect decks with a spare point or two to just play Fable, and it's going to be exactly the same as it is a 0. If you're playing 8 points and you have a spare point and you're in red, you should probably be playing Fable. If you're playing 7 points and you have some amount of non-legendary creatures and you want some card at the 3-drop slot that just can win the game by itself, maybe you should be spending a point on Fable. That card's really, really good. Yeah, it's one of those things where on the surface it looks like we're pointing Brainstorm, but we're actually pointing something like Dreadhorde Arcanist or Murktide Regent, where it's just a really egregiously powerful card that does too much for what it's asking of you. Okay, so there's some talk about Oko and Uro. Oko is on my personal watch list. Uro, I'm back and forth on. I think very few people who talk about Uro being a 1 or 0 point card have played nearly enough of that card. I have a whole video about Uro versus Phlage, and I think Uro at 2 and Phlage at 1 is a pretty reasonable midway point as we work out where those settle. I wouldn't be surprised if Uro goes to 1. Oko would go to 1 first, almost certainly. It's just a weaker card. But that's just a quick address. Goblin Recruiter is not going to 0 under my watch anytime soon. I don't know why people think that a 2-mana tutor for every card in your deck is somehow a 0 point card. And yes, as Fruity Dan said, it could be depointed if it was resolved in less than 10 seconds. Okay, we're talking about the watch list, reaction time. Thoughts on Abhorrent Oculus at 0 versus Murktide at 1. Oculus is on my watch list. That card's really good. Murktide is better. I don't know if it's a point difference. Raj, any thoughts?
Murktide is a faster card. Abhorrent Oculus is a lot more... how do I put it? It's a bit more reliable than Murktide is. Although it being 3 mana, it synergizes with a lot more other cards, such as Unearth and the white variant of Unearth. You can pre-war formal wear it, so it has all those synergies. But Murktide is a 2-mana 8/8 that can come out on turn
3.
Well, not. Yeah, on turn 3 usually quite reliably as an 8/8, and most of the times ends the games in 2 turns. So, but Oculus has the side advantage or the side grade of being synergistic with other cards that Murktide Regent isn't, and it also makes bodies. And Oculus, you have to still delve Oculus, but it is a 3-mana card. It is not a 2-mana card. Like being able to, on turn 3, play Murktide Regent and hold up Spell Pierce or Spell Snare's interaction is really key. Whereas tapping out on turn 3 sometimes for Grixis can be a bit risky if you don't have Force of Will or Force of Negation.
Yeah, another point to talk about for Oculus here is that we did just heavily point Lutri Grixis, and that is easily the best home for Oculus. It's very, very hard to just randomly put an Oculus in your deck. You're kind of heavily incentivized to play Mental Note and Thought Scour like you are with Murktide Regent, which narrows the range of what you can actually be playing. Those blue decks playing Mental Note and Thought Scour have been pointed pretty heavily recently. It's something that will be in the back of our minds, the fact that both of them have very different weaknesses, but very similar strengths is a really weird way to evaluate them. Oculus is really good against some removal and really good with reanimation. Murktide Regent attacks through other flyers much better. It's a whole thing. But yeah, it's something that we think about. Thoughts on the One Ring? You want to talk about that?
Ooh, yeah, One Ring. I think One Ring is a card that we did discuss in. Was it Outlaws or was it? I think we did discuss it a couple of meetings ago as a card that might need another point. But playing playing Wandering on the curve in like a fair red-white deck like you do in Modern is probably not powerful enough to justify it going to 2 points. It's really good with other pieces of fast mana. Obviously, that's where the card's most busted. Say if we go to the opposite end of the format and enough pointings happen over the course of the next 6 to 9 months where enough fair cards are pointed that Wandering sort of becomes a generic include in decks like Red-White or in decks like Jund, in decks like Blue-White Control, then we might have to revisit the Wandering. But it is a card that does get discussed. Not regularly, but it does come up in our discussions every now and then. I think the meta will have to reach a certain point of where Modern is now, where Wandering is 50% of the meta in most fair decks. If that happens in our format, where enough fair cards have been pointed that everyone's like, well, I won't play this card because One Rings is better at 1, then we might have to revisit something like the One Ring.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't have anything to add for that, but yes, Academy getting pointed does hit the One Ring.
Absolutely.
Because those cards are very, very friendly.
They go in a lot of the same decks.
Yeah. As for the Moxfield changes, we'll send a ping off after the stream. It'll get updated at some point. Realistically, there shouldn't be any large-scale events tomorrow, so there should be time to make sure that your deck is legal. Alright, I think we'll call it there. If anyone has anything further to add to the chat, you've got about a minute to put it here. Otherwise, again, you can just put stuff forward. You can talk to us on the Discord or in our DMs or shout it from the mountaintops if we're in hearing range, and we'll go through it then. But that is everything from our end. Next points update is February the 9th. It may be a week earlier, a week later. I don't exactly know how Aether Drift is going to work. But thank you so much for joining, everyone.
Yeah, thanks. It was great having chat. I think we reached like 90 views at one point, almost 100 if I'm not wrong, which is bloody brilliant. That was great. And it was great. We love fielding questions from chat. If you do have any more questions down the line, chuck them in Discord. You can DM one of us if you want. Always happy to chat about points.
That is it from us. Thank you for joining. Thank you for hanging out. The VOD for this, if you've missed it, will be going up sometime later tonight. But otherwise, that's it from me, and that's it from Raj. Have a good one, everyone.
Excellent.